Let's start by taking a look at the project that we're going to be designing throughout this section as we learn about all the different web design rules. And just like in the other sections, the first thing that we need is to get our starter files from the code that we downloaded in the very beginning. So here in the starter files, we need now this folder design. So for the first time, this project is not going to build on the previous one. So here you really need to go into your starter files and grab this folder here. So paste that wherever you are working. For me, it's the desktop. Let's close this down. And then I'm just opening a new VS Code window. All right. And then you can click open here, or also in the menu bar, you can use open in there. So from the desktop, we want the design folder. And so this is now our new project folder. So here we already have an index.html file and a style.css as well, along with a couple of images that we need for this project as well. Now what's different about this project is that this time I already coded all the HTML that we're going to need for this project. So basically what we're going to do as we go through the section is to adjust the CSS and also learn some new CSS properties in order to apply these different web design rules. But now let's take a look by clicking here on Go Live. And this is how our project looks like in the very beginning. So it's really just a bare bone web page, everything in black and white. And everything I did here was to simply apply some margins. And I also already built the layout. So what I want you to do after this video is to take 10 or 15 minutes to analyze this HTML and also the CSS that I wrote. So for example, here we have this global reset as always. We have a container element. And we have some CSS grid here also applied to this page. So for example, here we have these three columns. And so there we use this grid 3calls class. So this one here. So this is basically grid with 3 columns. So inside of this section. So yeah, so it's just a grid with 3 columns as I was saying. So that's why we have repeat 3 times 1fr. So just as we learned in the previous section. Then here in the header, there is another grid with these 2 elements here side by side. And yeah, as I was saying, there's a lot of margins already being applied, but basically that's it. So again, I think it would be a very good idea that you analyze this CSS code and also the HTML. So this here is an element that I think we didn't use before. But basically the element already says what it is. So this is just a semantic element, which means that it is a section. So for example, this one here is going to be one section, then this one, and all of this here. So those are sections in a web page. And so we have an element in HTML, which is exactly called section. So once again, we could have used a generic div here, but div doesn't have any meaning. And section does. So that's the better choice. Then another element that is important is the span element. Yeah, this here right here. So as it says here actually, the span is just a generic inline element that we use for text, but it doesn't have any meaning. So it's a little bit like the div element, which also doesn't have any meaning, but for inline elements. So when we just need a small element for some text, we always reach for the span element. All right. And then here was also the black quote element that we didn't talk about before. And this one is simply usually to write some quote. So quoting someone in this case is writing their testimonial. So it's basically Mary and Sarah saying something about these chairs. And so for that, we can use a block quote. All right. So again, take some time to go through all this code and try to understand it. And again, if you don't understand everything 100%, that's not a problem at all, because the main focus of this section is not really in the code, at least not so much in the HTML, but it's really on the web design rules and guidelines that we're about to learn. And speaking of that, the final result of this project will not be this, but this. So this looks quite different, right? It has a different typeface, so a different font, a more modern one. It has some green colors here, and the text is also not black. And there's a lot of rules here applied that make the typography look really good. Then we have these cards here with some shadows, and everything is nicely rounded. And we have this accent color here in the bottom. So yeah, this is basically applying some of the guidelines that we're going to learn through this project here, as it looks like in the beginning. So I hope that sounds exciting, and so let's now actually get started with learning about web design.